Hello, everybody. Good to see everybody on. My name is Kevin Kotchek. I'm the founder CEO of ChemicalQDevice. This is Thursday, July 11th, 2024 for discussion 143. So this is going to talk about Myriad LLM approaches to drug discovery, generative AI. This is based on a good 4 months of research, pretty much every single day, live demos, lots of hosting LLMs, having people kind of use LLMs and, all different types of devices too. So I'm going to start off with a couple quotes here. So this is exciting stuff. So this is all recent literature. And basically the first one says this, drug discovery, LLM literature, large language models show the potential to revolutionize molecular design with text-guided discovery and decision-making as agents due to vast available training data, including the body of scientific literature. And that was Due et al. In Nature Machine Learning or Machine Intelligence of this year. The second one, large language models are emerging as a powerful tool in chemistry across multiple domains. In chemistry, LLMs are able to accurately predict properties, design new molecules, optimize synthesis pathways, and accelerate drug and material discovery. So it's a lot more than one might anticipate because we're talking about context, and it can pick up on all the nuances or a lot of the nuances that humans use in the context of scientific applications, which is very exciting. Now, the third one, it says the ultimate ideal in AI-driven drug discovery is the automatic design of specific drugs for individual diseases, yet this goal remains technically distant at the present. However, recent advancements in large language models have significantly broadened the scope of applications, with various tasks being explored in the chemistry domain. So that makes me think like, this is our best shot, right? What it's basically saying like, we want a specific drug for this specific type of cancer application. And then are we able to get that, and how quickly can we do something like that? So, these are all the steps basically that can be taken. And, you know, it's a lot bigger and it's a lot, and I'll show you results at the end as well that support a lot of this. So this is an interesting article. It says generative AI will be designing new drugs all on its own in the near future. Obviously, this kind of hints at agentic workflows using retrieval augmented generation, having higher levels of explainability kind of every step. And, obviously Eli Lilly, Google DeepMind, NVIDIA behind a lot of this too. And I tried to use this week, and I actually have a 50-page report out with ChemicalQDevice. And this is one of them that I tried using because I thought it was so technically interesting reading the paper. And then it's only a couple lines of code, or say like, a block of code, a good cell code, in order to get it up and running. Now they use GPT-4 as a base model. They also use GPT-4 plus 18 different agents. So what this does is it basically pulls all this additional like patent check, controlled chemical check, safety, hazardous, flammable, these types of things. And it basically, while you're prompting, it'll say if it didn't pass the controlled chemical check, it won't provide the synthesis for it. And in their case, they'd send it to a robo-reactor, and the robo-reactor would do it as well. So again, awesome little thing. And they were able to produce these different compounds, or basically the workflows to produce these compounds. So you see DEET, and then some organocatalysts, and then this chromophore over here too. And it's a lot less. So GPT-4 is a good model. It's about 10 times as expensive as GPT-4o, but GPT-4o is a lot better. And you see here, this is the model I tried that worked the best. I tried 3.5 turbo. I tried, 4.0, and I think that was mostly it. And different combinations if it was the most recent one or an older one, those types of things. But anyways, they said they got it to work on their end. I'm not quite sure why it didn't work on my end. I was able to get answers to two of them, which is good. But I had 10 questions, and the other ones it wasn't able to generate. Now, this is an earlier paper I focused right when I started all this drug discovery stuff with GenAI. This is a Lamb MIT paper. It's a Science Advances. And it basically allows you, if you want a specific pooling strength on a protein, like this very desirable function, it goes beyond, like, say, if you want like certain primary structure, like amino acid sequence, or a certain, secondary structure or tertiary structure, these types of things. And, so basically, it worked decently. So I was able to generate 8 proteins based on their notebook. And, so it's based on the number of alpha helices. So the more alpha helices, basically, the stronger the pulling strength. And if you desire a certain pulling strength that's very high, it's probably going to have more alpha helices and less beta sheets and less random coils, right? Because you get these, interactions between the R groups of the, amino acids. So these are the four that I had generated from that. And again, what's going on right now is I'm covering all these myriad different ways of using large language models. This actually used a diffusion model as well. And say, for instance, so this chart on the left is what I'm plugging in or what they used to. And in this specific case, ours stay the same, both mine and the authors. And then the ones on the right are the actual ones that I generated. And these are new, they're de novo proteins, and they can go, and I actually tested these further too with some other of my, protein generator, molecular weights and perplexity and these types of things that's associated with this type of technology. So you can see here, so the more alpha helices here with this protein 0 is going to have a higher pulling strength compared to 3 and 7 at the bottom there. Now, actually, Meta AI does do protein-related stuff. If you say drugs or anything like that, it doesn't do. Now, Llama 3 70 billion on its own, you can do drug discovery, as with GPT-4o, Mistral, GPT 3.5, Llama 3 8 billion is not going to be the greatest model, but basically you could say design a protein sequence that exhibits all this. So the presence of magnesium cation, AMP, all these ATP binding for general function, these types of things. Okay. So that's the input. This is what I give Meta AI. And here's the output. So this M is a specific amino acid, G, I believe, is glycine, and K is lysine. So this is what it generated for me. And it's good to see these models, LLMs today in 2024, this is based on 2024 innovation here. They have a really good way of going into a specific mode, and I'd say GPT-4o and ChatGPT-4o goes into that mode the best, as far as like, now I'm an expert chemist, or now I'm trying to design this drug. And here's the breakdown. Here's for the magnesium binding site, AMP, ATP binding site, and it seems to back up things pretty well. It looks like a shorter protein. It's not that big. But basically, you'll see this type of advanced functionality, and I'll show you a bunch of the GPT-4o work that I did this week in the report, is basically it goes into a specific, especially with GPT-4o, it'll be like a specific kind of format. And no matter how I ask these different drug discovery questions, like create a cancer compound for XYZ, it always seems to give it in a very kind of like, formatted way, where it was less so with the Llama 370 billion. So again, this is mostly based on Llama 37 billion, and then it's like kind of the consumer version of interacting with it, but it can't do a lot of the drug discovery stuff. Okay, so the actual answer for mole instructions, so they had the training set with this, and that's where this question came from. This is one of their training questions. So mole instructions provided the answer to an answer that they kind of already knew. Okay, so yes, it's supposed to be a little bit different, but I actually looked in the training set, and this specific question was in the training set. So, when you have a training set, it's supposed to like generalize. So when you have new data, that's a little bit different. But anyways, you see the functionality between the two, and mole instructions has other components too that I've used in other stories. Now, you can't talk about LLMs without mentioning agents. And I just saw in the news, like at the batch, it's deeplearning.ai's email, and they were mentioning that AWS is making this huge push to agents. And an agent is basically, I believe it's just reinforcement learning, not just, but it is reinforcement learning. And it's a reward cycle. So when it gets all of this feedback, it says this, do this, this, do it, and it has this advanced software functionality. So what we're talking about today is where this query, that's where we come in. We're going to have some natural language processing query. I say, I need this specific thing. And then it's going to go back to the agent, and then the agent might have to go into some other type of, really good machine learning model, execute code, get the response. And then this is all done with some data set. So this is all, I've worked on a number of these agents as far as like the lane chain or the lane graph ones, and they're typically not as high performing as the equivalent if you just set it up like it's just some graph as opposed to like an agent that like each of these, like a code executor, has a bias towards doing very well at executing code, and then some of the other agents, and it's kind of up to the imagination as how far you go, but it's still a developing area, and it's not kind of as cemented as using an LLM with like retrieval augmented generation, like the best one of those. And then that leads into LangChain, Langsmith. I don't think they're doing LangServe. It's a way of hosting their models anymore. I don't see it on the website. And here's an example of basically using, uh, de novo molecular design, for this specific case to get these entities. Now, there's a huge distinction between generative AI, or generative molecular machine learning, however you want to look at it, and deep. So deep generative or deep deep learning applied to generative models is the current thing. So that's where you'll find autoencode or variational autoencoders, diffusion models, those types of things. They're deep models, but language, LLMs, are also, most of them that we use, or like, everybody, the research community uses, those are also deep. And so they're part of the deep generative model thing. So generative AI has been around for some time, but we're seeing this increased functionality, especially with natural language processing, and the ability. And I'll show you later. I set up a couple judges. One being a Llama 3 judge and a GPT 4.0 judge. And in old judge templates, you have to use a very specific rigid template. And I had success in previous weeks just typing in a very descriptive two sentences, and it picks up on the context of that, and it picks up on the context of like 2,000 words that I sent it, like based on 9 different LLM combinations. So, and I'll get to that study. But figure LangChain, Langsmith is about interlinking. Now, that's LangChain. Now, Langsmith is you go on and you see the step by steps, every single step, the times, the costs, their approximate costs. You should always check your OpenAI or whatever API that you're using. So it's just exciting stuff. Now, coming this fall, and then, of course, people will have drug discovery applications, is the main issue is RAM. It's not the storage on the model. So if you have let's just say a 4 gigabyte compressed Llama 3 8 billion model, that's going to occupy 4 gigabytes of RAM. And most iPhones, like my iPhone 15 Pro, that's only 8 gigs of RAM. So that's half of the RAM you want just to do that for that specific thing. So I had said originally, they have to be under 2 gigabytes, but I'm more thinking maybe under a gigabyte, but say, for instance, this OpenAI ChatGPT 4.0, this is all coming from Apple's WWDC. You'll have some smaller local model that's doing these large language, process or natural language processing with the user. And then for the more complex tasks, say, go off into an Apple server that's like as secure as backing up your data, like that type of thing. But it would have, the OpenAI chat, GPT 4.0 with that. So it basically, if you go to train a model, even with a nice MacBook Pro like this, 48 gigabytes, you're still looking at a really small model just to do that. Now to fine tune, you can bump up because you're not changing all the parameters. And for inference, you could bump up even more. So on an iPhone 15, you're mostly going to be using it for inferencing. And what inferencing is it's basically the model's all set, and then you're just submitting your prompt, and then the model is going to be returning a generation or an answer or an output. Okay. And you can see with an iPad Pro with a little bit more RAM, and these are rough estimates, but basically that kind of gives you an idea. So you can use this across. So this specific app, local AI, iPhone 15 Pro, iPad Pro, MacBook Pro, and you'll see some of the speeds here, 10 seconds, 8 seconds, and 5. I'm sorry, that was the total generation. 14 tokens per second, 28 tokens per second. And this MacBook one was not native to this iOS app, so it didn't perform any better than iPad Pro. And I asked it, how has generative AI AI been used in cancer drug discovery. But this is a very small model. It's about 2 GB. Like I said, a lot of these have extra context that you're never going to use. Say for instance, Llama 370 billion parameter model has so much information in it as far as, you ask a specific query and it can go off and be a judge, or it can go off and be like a specific expert in like finance or chemistry or these types of things. And this one I was very happy with. This is called LLM Farm, and this is taken from the MacBook. And I was able to upload a model live on a discussion to Hugging Face, and then download that also to my iPad and iPhone. And then I did, comparisons between the three. And I think I got up to about, well, it just depends. Well, for this one, it was still probably 50 tokens per second or less, and it's going to be less on the iPad. But it was more distinguishable that it was running well because I could select Apple Silicon and Apple Metal using LLM Farm, which is an app that I recommend if you want to do that type of testing. Now, if you want to just get in and do something really quick, download GPT for All. It's probably the easiest to set up. I think still is a desktop chat client. But again, with this one, got up to 59 tokens per second, and this is the Llama 3 model. So, it's optimized well. It's just you can't do a ton with it. Like if you want to do a bunch of different, these myriad different LLM approaches across all different types of software, it's going to be, more restricted to desktop. And then OLLAMA, the next slide I'm going to get into more, it's synonymous with serving, right? So typically if you have OLLAMA and Open Web UI, this is the first step that you take after you get OLLAMA installed. You go OLLAMA run llama 3 dash dash verbose, and then you actually don't need to put verbose on the prompt there. And it prints out all this stuff. So say, for instance, I showed you the 59 tokens per second before, and this specific one is 49 tokens per second. And, it's not a full Llama 3 model. It's about a third of the size is what you get on Hugging Face, so it's quantized, right? So it's about 4 or 5 gigabytes in size, and it's hard, but you can find out where exactly it is sitting on your machine. And, so I asked it, how has generative AI been used in cancer drug discovery? And then this is a nice answer. This is actually the complete prompt, or the complete generation that pops up. And it does mention San Diego in here too. And I can monitor this by RAM. This is like RAM bump. So it's approximate. So it's like, if this is a 4 or 5 gig model, it's going to use about 4 or 5 gigs of RAM. I've gotten up to about the Llama 3 70 billion parameter model, and that is 40 gigs of model size. So that uses about 40 gigs of RAM, and I only have 48 on this. So I've got it to work with limited functionality on the 70 billion parameter model. Now, where it's all at, you may host models on your laptop, like if you have a nicer laptop, because you're going to be doing things on it, and then, user sensor requests, and then these tokens per second are all processing on this specific laptop. This nice, it's a, probably, it's not the highest RAM, but it should be right up there with speed. It's an M3 Max of this year. So on a 1.8 billion parameter model, it's about 130 tokens per second for images. Now, I had issues getting their image to this laptop, right? Because there's network congestion, and I don't think I'm in the most optimized thing with the Open Web UI quite yet. But if I switch to something smaller like this Qwen 2, I could get up to 153, even if they tried to upload a couple documents, but there was issues with that. But say just more median, it was maybe 170 to 190 tokens per second. And I would check out the report and I go through. So a token is basically a numerical representation of a word, right? So there's approximately 1.3 tokens per word. So you could look at these, divide each of these by 1.3, and then you're approximately going to be at words per second if that's how you choose to think of this, okay? But anyways, I had a bunch of users from Michigan, Texas, and in California too, to explore this functionality of using Open Web UI with OLLAMA and either of these two models, the first one being an image upload, the second one being text, okay? So the other thing here is this. Okay, so that leads us to the report here, and I would highly suggest to see this because it helped even me to visualize this whole process of creating prompts on your own to run it across a bunch of different models, like these types of things. And basically you can see here, so this came out just yesterday, it's 50 pages. I spent a lot of time on this. And what I found is basically obviously the bigger, better models are going to produce better generations. So that was basically the Llama 370 billion and also the GPT 4.0. Now for judges, I choose to use, so those were both, the Llama 370 billion is through an AI inferencing company called Grok, GROQ, and I'm getting over 200 tokens per second on this big model, right? That it sends my API request to them. Now the GPT 4.0 is also an API request, and all that processing between Grok and then OpenAI, these two separate models, are all done on their hardware. Okay, so you'll find when you do these collab notebooks, you just need like a CPU, and then your API requests go up into the cloud. Okay. And so basically, these were the 10 prompts that I choose to use for this specific study. And in specific, it's so you can start to read these as it goes on. And the first one, provide a better, faster, and less expensive method to synthesize methotrexate. Methotrexate is the #1 generic cancer drug. #2, using only hydrogen gas, nitrogen gas, molecular oxygen, and CO2, provide a synthesis to create high purity paclitaxel, also known as Taxol, showing relevant chemical structures. Okay. #3, using only sucrose and nitrogen gas as reactants under mild conditions, create 10 cancer drug candidates. So I gave it some hard questions. This #3, sucrose, you can't use as actually a lot of people do, but it's the nitrogen gas it's relatively inert unless under very specific conditions. It's less inert than like argon gas. But anyways, I wanted to use it as a reactant. Now, the issue I think that it has here is I said you can only use it with mild conditions. Now, mild conditions is like room temperature, readily available acids and bases, these types of things. So, these questions went on, and I tried to like really fine tune into all these specific ways that the LLMs can interact and produce these generations. So #4 has to do with environmentally friendly catalysts and starting materials using sigma aldrich and BWR chemicals, like these readily available places. And then #5, structure activity relationships. #6, Lipinski's rule of 5, do it this specific way of protein. Now, the one that I thought was really interesting was #8's really interesting too. Produces a cancer compound that is easiest to screen for impurities via standard spectroscopic methods. And that's proton NMR, like nuclear magnetic resonance. This is like mass spec or mass spectrometry or HPLC or GCMS, those types of things. #9, if you're in business, you would really like this, the generation from this. And again, it's in the report there. Design a cancer candidate, including reaction conditions, and estimate their total cost and availability. Okay, so I'll get to some of these answers. Again, I had to be brief even with the report. And I only, on specific problems, I think 1, 5, and 8, I actually went through all of the generations. And #10, provide 3 novel cancer candidates that can be quickly synthesized by a chemist of any skill level. And I think with this technology is you're going to see, and I highlighted in the report, is basically it's going to be, I believe it's going to create more jobs because unlike any other type of machine learning outside just, some other natural language processing technologies, but not as robust as this, it gives people that don't understand, that haven't done machine learning for 3 years, this opportunity to interact with software and use it directly or to ask these questions And there's no limits, right? So when you're interacting with these advanced AI models, you can change the conversation. It's you could the key is if you don't want it to have memory of the previous text, is you just start a new conversation. But that's what I believe, and that's what I see with this is that yes, it's going to be like the what do they say? As bosses sit down and calculate which task goes to AI or humans and these type of things, at the bare minimum, AI is able today, based on my results and findings of this, is to search for just broad information across chemistry disciplines to create drugs. And then we see this on this specific one. So this is prompt one. So remember, it was provide a better, faster, and less expensive method to synthesize methotrexate. Okay, so the number one it's the number one generic cancer drug on the market right now. So basically, that's what I did. I submitted that prompt. Now, each of these, so this one and two, it's the same GPT-4o model, except for the context window. Now, context window limits the number of tokens, both the input and the output tokens that you are. Now, it's set by your input tokens because that's what you're submitting. So say if we looked at the specific prompts, and sometimes there's a little bit more other information that you send to the model, but if we say provide a 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So this is 11 words. So it's only chewing up, somewhere probably between 15 and 20 tokens. And then we have 1024 to work with. So it's 1024 minus 15 or 20. So we still have about 1,000 tokens. Now, what I found with all of these is that I think the main thing is that it's trying its hardest, it's giving good responses everywhere from the 4.0 down. Now, the 3.5 turbo just is old. It has old training data, and it's just, it doesn't produce long results. So we see 140 generation tokens, 152. It's a little bit faster. And, with these other ones that use Grok, so these are smaller models, very likely than the GPT-4o. We don't know, it's proprietary. But Llama 3 70B is an open source model. So what this allows you to do is basically if it's the full model, it's 150 gigs. If it's quantized, say like a Q4, it's like 40 gigabytes. Okay. So anyways, Grok takes this and puts it on some really good hardware, and now it's running at 250 tokens per second. And I can't even run Llama 3 8 billion on this at 50, right? So I can run barely like the 70B on this, but it's like really slow. It's like just at single digit tokens per second. Now with the Mixtral, Mixtral is made by a company called Mistral. And Mixtral, it doesn't use the full 56 if it's 8 by 56, it's 56 billion. What I asked ChatGPT, and it says it's more like it's using 13 billion parameters. So that's why it's a lot faster than the Llama 3 70B, is that it's an expert, but it's only choosing to use 13 billion on a specific task, right? So figure maybe, the kind of earlier parts of the software is shared between them, and then it probably uses its own, portion for the expert. Now, the next part with this is that, so each of these, so these are all API calls, okay? So these are in Colab notebooks. And then, like I said, the GPT 3.5 Turbo, I kind of knew it wasn't going to work. And the judge scores are really important here too. Now, across the board and pretty much all of these 10 prompts or questions, so we're at number one here, they all favored 4.0. Now, it was a toss-up sometimes for Llama 3 would sometimes favor itself higher scores as opposed to GPT-4o. And we know that 4.0 is kind of like the leading model, as far as broad utility in this specific case, like a chemical expert. And so anyways, you see in this one, Llama 3 did give itself like a little bit higher score, but you can have that. So if you have, this is an API call with Llama 3, and then I'm also testing it with Grok.com of the same model. So it can kind of prefer that a style of its own generation. So these are known things to occur, okay? So this next page is basically, what I did is for this number 5, so design a new cancer drug candidate using a goal-oriented approach based on SAR, structure, activity, relationship, predict their physical properties and provide smiles. Now, smiles is like the number one way to represent a very abbreviated like carbon skeleton of the molecules. And you see across the board, these are triplicates, okay? So this specific question, I ran for each of these 9. And you see here in this first one, 9.5, 9.5, 9.5, GPT-4o favoring itself, but Llama 3 favor it as number 1 as well. So that's where the 2 judges came in. And, it's good to see this too. And it'd be good in the future also to use a judge that was even less biased in every case. But nonetheless, it's pretty conclusive, and based on my, evaluation, my human evaluation of this is that GPT-4o, typically was the best scores. And I also saw the context window when it was set to 2024, tended to have higher results too. So again, they go off like modes, like especially GPT-4o. So you bump your context window up to 4096. I might get, 50 more tokens, something like that. But it just wasn't as preferred to run that with that context window. Okay. So, that's the summary too here, is you see a lot of these in the GPT 3.5 Turbo, just across the board with these are typically lowest. And occasionally, just very rarely, Llama 3 would just give a sentence or two. The 70 billion model is just, I don't know, this is impossible or something like that. And then with 7 and 8, Mixtral 2 can, sometimes give a response. So again, each of these, the prompt on this specific one was run 3 times on ChatGPT, 4o, and then 3 times on the Llama 3 judge. Now, I quantified these, and basically, with the GPT one up here, the average for itself was 9.5, and then over here, the average that Llama 3 judge gave was very close to that 9.4. It just typically, sometimes I would just have, let's just say the ChatGPT 4 judge was just more consistent, more detailed, getting the higher scores across the board. And that's kind of anticipated, like they're not exactly equivalents. Now, an Anthropic Claude, 3.5 Sonnet, but it didn't do drug discovery tasks, so I couldn't use that. So that would have been good to use. And then you can see here for the Llama 3 1024 context window, the judge ChatGPT 4o gave an 8.2, but Llama 3 gave a 9.2. So that's looking at this specific line here. So, that's probably the case, right? Like this is totally an expected thing. Like if Llama 3 creates a generation, when you go to ask it again to judge it compared to other models, what is it? So again, this specific prompt, these are all compared to each other, and it's like this. So it's like on this specific one, on a scale of 1 to 10 in 0.1 increments, with 10 being the best, rank each of these responses. So 1 is the GPT-4o, 2 all the way up to 9. Okay, and then I'm saying based on this input. Now, I'm with the older type of software with large language models, I think they were very picky as far as if you want to be playing in this certain role, you have to have this specific type of format, as being a judge. And what I'm seeing here is it's very flexible. I had 2 minor spelling mistakes in my prompts that it didn't even seem to matter. And other people report these things too, that its context is so good, it's built in, and it says, like, it knows that that's supposed to be that word, So, the huge takeaway with this is basically the software is a lot more advanced than I thought. And here's an example of the GPT-4o, this 1024. So this was one of the more challenging questions, using only hydrogen gas, nitrogen gas, a molecular oxygen, CO2, provide a synthesis for paclitaxel. Now, you can get this, and people do get it from a tree. The Taxol drug is the name on that. So paclitaxel is the generic. But basically, you see with all these steps here, it says, doing this is not feasible using current chemical synthesis. Paclitaxel is a complex diterpenoid, and I think there is a way, right? Now, it may require, these extravagant other, catalysts or enzymes or high pressure, high temperature, those types of things. But for what it is, it's kind of acknowledging that it doesn't have the solution right now. And it says, I can provide a high level overview of how modern synthetic chemistry might if you're using H2N2, O2, and CO2. So the first one I really liked, so it's Fischer-Tropsch, and then this is combining CO2 with hydrogen, and the next ones is functional groups with N2 and H2, nitrogen fixation. A lot of these things are making sense on my knowledge of this with chemistry. Incorporate oxygen into it to form alcohol, OH, carbonyl, CO, double bond, carboxyl, which could be like a carboxyl gas or carboxylate. And then we see with these other ones too, stereoselective. So anyways, just across the board, it was very common to see this type of response from the GPT-4o, especially with this context window at 1024. So whatever it was, it seemed to have made a difference. And like I said, I wasn't seeing the generation tokens. The highest it went up to is like this mixtral at about 1100. But in theory, it can go up to 32,768 minus this 15 tokens for that input. Okay. So I think the main thing is just the knowledge base is, continually getting better. And all of these technologies are workable with today, especially the 4o, meaning that if I add some other retrieval augmented generation pipeline where I can also specify in my other 10 documents that these are more important, but I need that context. I need the brain of the GPT-4o to sift through its own understanding on top of what I'm giving it. And, so these types of things, it's very workable technology. It's very practical technology. It's not that expensive. So like I said, the GPT-4o, it's like $5 per input per million tokens, right? And then, like I said, and I forgot to mention that the ChemPro, which I mentioned earlier, that this one still, it has the old price. And, so for instance, and it's not as good as the 4o, but it worked the best for this. And the answers weren't the greatest. But again, it's a 50-page report, so I would definitely check it out. And, just across the board with the judges, they tended to be very consistent. They both didn't like GPT 3.5 Turbo. And I think this aids very well to explainability. If I have GPT-4o, which is running on OpenAI servers, and if I have Llama 370 billion, which is running on Grok's servers, and they all have pretty similar, with maybe Llama 3 biasing its own, higher scores, for its own generations, even though I didn't tell it, I never included in here, which is which, right? I just said response. Those types of things. But again, like the GPT-4o is fantastic software. We'll see it in phones, like the smaller use cases, like running locally. And I like where everything is right now and listening, like I said, the batch or deeplearning.ai has kind of an update with this too. I think it's sitting very well. And if you were to convert all of this into chemical information now, so instead of talking about, we're still going to use words and sentences to ask for requests, but instead now we're thinking about building blocks. And then instead of like doing a RAG on a literature paper, we're doing RAG on all this, like, just like more like SciFinder, like it just has all of these reactions, and then you have access to use, basically what you want, that type of thing. So again, the key word with all of this is just lower barrier of entry across the board for entry-level chemists that can interact with this software. And unlike other types of machine learning where it gets very specific and multiple different notebooks, and you finally have something and these types of things, and you become an expert in that specific thing, many people can speak language, right? And it goes beyond just English language too with some of these models. So that's the definitive thing, is that it'll just be some, in a year or two, just very common, especially in the high-tech cities, that you're just, you say, okay, well, how did you get this generation, and, which software and stuff like that. It's just a normal tool. But that was the two ahas when I had when I was getting a lot of these outputs and seeing like, okay, GPT-4o doing good, Llama 3 70 billion, which is likely a smaller model, also doing okay, and then GPT 3.5 not as the turbo not as good. Mixtral was kind of hit and miss. So that's the distinguishing feature with this type of technology compared to other types of machine learning is you're sitting in a I have it on my desktop or I can use it on my phone and you're having a conversation with something that is very reminiscent of having a conversation with some other human expert in a field. And when I first started using GPT 3.5 Turbo initially, like GPT-4 at that time was still too slow and it was a little expensive, is that it was kind of hit and miss. And I would say on code, it's code I'm favoring GitHub, the open source notebooks to build off of. Um, so I'm not quite as happy with the code portion. But, with all these other things, like I can't highlight enough, like it just goes into a specific, like, okay, it's a chemical expert and now it knows how to do these things very correctly. And it's getting pretty consistently above 9. I don't think in any case it assigns anybody a 10. And the most accurate way that I found with these judges, is to compare them, like it's this is what I'm inputting here with the responses minus the model names. Okay. And this was more accurate than if I ran a single response from GPT-4o 3 times. Because in this case, you give it a bunch of things to compare it to. And I think that's an effective approach moving forward because it can, there's less deviation of giving it 7.8 versus 9. And again, the Llama 3 70 billion model was worse than the GPT-4o on just judging a single response and then having the judge evaluate 3 times. So like I said, I the results are really good. And, the next steps are obviously taking this. And obviously I learned a ton, but to go into the wet lab and say, based on this information, and you're just going to learn a lot more recent stuff in chemistry and these types of things. But you develop drugs, right? And you'll have some hits, based on this. But I see a lot of it getting, the chemical space is massive, right? So these are most of these are small molecules that I was asking on, except for this the peptide less than it's 5,000 grams per mole. That's getting a little bit bigger, but I didn't give it like DNA, RNA, huge proteins, stuff like that. So you're going to see bigger types of, uh, applications to other biomolecules, larger grams per mole kind of thing. And again, I see it getting very specific to the actual chemical, like the building of it, and saying like it's called stepwise. So for every step, build, and then, recheck again, get a better solution. And even if you have these expert chemists for 20 or 30 years, they're not going to know everything about every single decade. So you're balancing the two, right? And I think at least initially now, it's the creativity that you're getting from the software and thinking about things and getting a ton of information. And again, each of these that were sent over, and I mentioned, so these limits here, so the context windows. So if each of these prompts, and I added this is approximately, 2,000 tokens, probably a little bit more, plus the prompts, so around there. So if that's 2 times 8, 16,000. So you're effectively sending over, in tokens, 16,000 words, like 13 or 14,000. And you're having it try to distinguish between all of these, variables of, there's just multiple different contexts. So this statement wouldn't work. I don't think this would work in GPT 3.5 Turbo. And the only issue that I had here, and this kind of shows it, is sometimes it would rank by response number. So 1, 2, 3, 4. And sometimes in this case, it ranked by score. So it was 9.5, 8.58. So he goes response 125. So I could change that for the next time, but it's not a huge deal. I just have to be aware. And, when you read some of these and the issues that I had with the ChemCrow, so ChemCrow is GPT-4 plus 18 different agents that looks through patent issues and, control chemical or dangerous or, these types of things. And it also helps, with the reaction too, is I usually got some errors. It was a GPT 3.5 turbo error, and I tried every other type of OpenAI, but when they got it to work, they reported, and earlier in here, with the DEET and the organocatalyst and the novel chromophore, they had it working and they sent it to a robo reactor. So you prompt it in, and then it comes up synthetic conditions. And in an ideal world, based on that one or two sentences, and this would be like the future drug discovery here, based on that one or two sentences, creates the synthetic conditions and sends it straight to an automatic robo reactor, and it just creates the physical drug, right, based on if it's solvent free or with solvent. And that's what they were trying to achieve with this, and I didn't have quite the success. And the answers that I were getting, it switched into these modes of saying, well, I can't do this, so I'll assume some hypothetical drug like methotrexate or cisplatin, these types of things. But it was consistent, and it only happened once. I only had one minor hallucination. It was with the Llama 3 70 billion judge, which was run off of Rogue.com. I also hit a rate limit too on a specific. It just didn't like one of these to judge. But the response that it gave, it tried to give 10 responses, and then it tried to fill one and give it the same score that it gave GPT-4, like a 9.5, and then it tried giving it another 8.5. But that's the only thing I could catch, right? As far as transcribing all of this information into the report. So, just in summary is that, you always want to check things as many times as you can. And the more you could say, and I really like this experiment here where I have in completely different hardware and software with one judge and a completely different hardware software another judge, and they're both given the same prompt, to judge these 9 responses, and they're pretty consistent. It's just, just across the board, and this is just for one of the prompts too. Are there any questions at this point? And feel free, so you could put in the chat, you can unmute too. So as far as this is one very specific application that a lot of people use with large language models. And anytime you think not to run, you should run, because you'd learn a lot more information about, the consistency and results and these types of things. And it's kind of like a launching platform. And I thought that these experiments worked very well because it allowed me to go back to, I have 2 degrees in chemistry, and to pull all of this, knowledge. And some of this, like the Lipinski's rule of 5, I took medicinal chemistry and I took like biochemistry and neurochemistry and like cell signaling. But this Lipinski's rule of 5, that reminded me from one of these papers. So from the second slide that they were talking about that's a common approach too. So, besides just lowering the bar, and again, feel free to put it in the chat if you have any questions, for other medicinal chemists to use this that are less experienced and still to have a higher chance of creating in early phase drug discovery, maybe 10,000 leads, but there are just a lot, there's a lot more information that you can pull using this advanced forms of AI, So, that's how I see things. It's very practical technology, and tapping into GPT-4o, which is the plus side with it. I mean, it is proprietary, so they can limit the types of application. And OpenAI has decided that drug discovery is good, and molecular design and generation should be a huge thing. So if you have an open source model, you can do other things as well with weights and parameters. And Llama 3, the 8 billion that I showed you, is completely open, unless you get to like 700 million active users per month. But say, for instance, its max context window is 8192. And in this specific case, I didn't get anywhere close to, when I set the context window for all these things in two different notebooks, right? But anyways, there's room for growth too, right? Because say if it's just a subject that it's not capable yet, I wasn't trained on any more information than this is abbreviated. Maybe this is like 2/3 of the original response. This approximately 500 tokens. So, even if it's like that, it's still showing awesome functionality, like just understanding of hard chemistry topics and how to put molecules together to do all these things. And I think a lot of the times you'll find when you go to run the software is you're just continuously learning, because this knowledge base goes far beyond what you learned, or its knowledge base goes far beyond very likely what you learned when you went to school, right? So, and you can see there's tests for that. So there's other, it's trained on, college chemistry and college medicine. And if you ask something like Meta AI that I mentioned earlier, then it'll tell you all of these like, very respectable databases that it was trained on. So that's what I see. And especially with the judges, corresponding that they, the rankings are similar, and this is just one of them. That it's based on some other physical location's hardware running their own software, and somebody else's physical location of their hardware running their software. And then you give them the same type of, this what's in bold with the responses, like these 500 token things, without saying the model names, and then they come back with similar answers. I think that's a piece to the explainability. And, especially for documents, I was on a call last Saturday with somebody in healthcare, and she said that she searched like 20 different documents, and it says like page 30, this is using LLM, I think LLM plus RAG. It was at least RAG, retrieval augmented generation. Now you need to use an LLM if it's not like very clear, like if it's in paper or if it's some type of chemical instructions. That's what GPT-4o is good at, is it understands the context outside of just finding it. Like RAG would like find it in whatever, and then it works with LLM to have the context and say like, okay, based on my brain and based on your augmented generation, the answer came from page 30 is what she showed. And she said she did like 20 different documents. So figure the same type of thing with much larger chemical spaces, going into, bioproteins, that, at each of the steps saying like, okay, this is coming from here, or this is coming from, there's all mole instructions was one of the ones that I mentioned earlier, but there's all these other chemical databases that could be understood on a higher level now beyond just like our human interaction and, previous types of machine learning. And like I said, now with LLMs, potentially looking at multiple databases all at the same time with this increased functionality, that's very likely the end goal with all this is, again, if you could have a specific medicine that you need for a specific disease, but even before we get to that point, do things a lot more explainably, based on other types of machine learning, and also point to things. But the sheer amount of information, that LLMs can consider is very, very high. And it takes both. And FDA says this is the human AI team, with other types of machine learning, and that was last year. But I think it's coming. I think it's really coming to a lot of different fields on a bigger kind of basis, and especially, moving just beyond literature searches with LLM and RAG, this augmented generation of just literature to now chemical databases and understanding, connecting the different dots, right? And we've seen emergent behavior before, which is basically it finds things and it thinks of things that we haven't anticipated it to. So it's a very exciting field. And if you're in a startup or a young company, I would highly suggest Generative AI because it's working technology and maybe $100 a month. The big issue that I have is Colab now. I need access to a certain GPU when I need it. I just don't need that many hours, right? But, there's fast.ai, there's, all different ways, and you could run locally if you have a, decent setup too. So, but yeah, feel free to put it in the chat. And again, so you can check out the LinkedIn, the reports up there as well. And this is just a very small portion of the report, and it covers, more ground than what I'm talking about right now. And if you missed it, if you're tuning in a little bit later, I can host my own custom LLMs. It says you can on a Olama, and I've used it with like LLM Farm. But with Olama and this one, I can serve. So meaning that I'm serving a model, I'm hosting it, and other people have access. So the requests come in, and then it runs at that speed, these tokens per second on this laptop. That's what's recorded, and then it returns it back to the user, in different parts of the world or the US. And again, if you're just starting off, this is the good entry-level one, GPT for all. It runs really good on Ubuntu, which is Linux, and it runs really good on Mac. You can set the setting to metal, and it should be a little bit faster than some of the other types of, running LLMs. And again, this is what's coming in the fall. So don't expect, people say phones are supercomputers. I don't believe it. Maybe on a size basis, like a ratio compared to the next step up. But anyways, just expect mostly inferencing. On one of these applications, I did find a setting to do fine tuning on the phone, but that's a challenge. That'd probably have to be a really small model, but anticipate small models because you can remove other parameters, weights, and machine learning, remove those. And then if you're only focusing on a very specific like drug discovery task, then you're not, you don't need all that other context in different areas. And as I showed before with the Qwen 2 0.5 performed really well, and it's only 352 megabytes. It's just not going to have the detail and the length of like a Llama 3. But it knows English and Chinese very well. So, and, so I went over a bunch of these other ones. And then coming back to this quote, or these quotes, is that that's the whole goal of this, right? Is basically the ultimate ideal, having a specific purpose for a drug and then creating it. And 5 years ago, maybe people say, well, that's not possible, right? There's just so many other variables. But I think we're at that point now with LLMs that just its ability to search these broad, chemical spaces and with literature too, that it's very much a reality that we're seeing right now. So and feel free if there's any other questions, and we'll see more stuff like ChemCro too. So say for instance, it's GPT-4, which would be updated to GPT-4o, and then all of these other ones. So smiles to weight, smiles to price, similarity, functional groups, pattern check. But I think a lot of this is getting picked up by GPT. The base model knows some of these. I'm almost 100% sure. Right, but that's going to be a thing too, is in the future, the base models, even before as developers, we have to add any other like bells or whistles or any other tools or agents or RAG workflows, it's going to increase in that type of functionality too. So everything's like on a basis, like GPT-4o came out, and then GPT-5 is supposed to have PhD level, this and that, and I believe more than one subject. And I would say some of it touches on that too. But just also plan for that you you could probably get pretty far with just using your application with base models, and that was mostly shown here, except for the last one. The GPT-4 ChemCro is not a base model. All these other ones are. It's either running on OpenAI server or it's running off of Grok. So Grok gets these open source models. They're either Llama 3 community license or Apache 2, and then it just runs on, Grok like that. So, okay. Any other last questions or comments? And I appreciate everybody coming on. So again, this has been Thursday, July 11th, 2024, for discussion 143 for Myriad LLM approaches. And, definitely stay with the technology. I think it's really going to start taking off, especially as we see it this fall. Have a good rest of the night and have a productive rest of the week. Take care, everybody.